Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Today I will be showing you how to cut out a sweatsuit. So if you're interested, stay tuned. For this tutorial, you will need your fabric of choice, your pattern, a ruler, elastic, thread, scissors, and a pair of pants. So right now, I'm just unfolding the fabric and I'm going to be folding it and placing it how I want it to be on the table. I included this part in so that you can see how I'm actually folding the fabric. I'm folding it hamburger style, salvage to salvage, which is basically the way the fabric stretches. You want to use the fabric the way it stretches because the stretch is supposed to go over our bodies. I mean, you actually can use it the opposite way, but being as though this is a sweatsuit and I wanted to, have a little stretch to it, I'm going to use it the way the stretch goes. So I folded it once widthwise, which is hamburger way, and I'm going to fold it again hamburger style. So it'll be 4 layers of fabric. One will be folded, one side will be folded, and then the 2 pieces underneath will be loose. So I'm putting my bodice pattern, which is basically from my shoulders to a little bit underneath my bust, my boobs, in other words. I'm putting this on the fabric and I'm tracing around it. I just used the fabric for like a template. I just used the pattern for like a template. So the the pattern goes under my bust, but I want the tunic top. Now I'm making the tunic top. So I want the tunic top to go all the way like to my ankles, which you can see right here, I'm measuring for it to go all the way to my ankles. So I went from the top of the fabric to like 55 inches for it to go to my ankles. I don't want it to touch the floor. I just want it to like graze my ankles. And once I make the measurements, I measure from the top to the bottom across like 3 times. And then I take the ruler and I make a straight line across. And then I'll put my pattern back down and basically trace around the pattern and then add, whatever extra lines I'm going to use to make the shirt. But you'll see what I'm talking about in a couple of minutes. So I moved the pattern over like an inch because I don't want the tunic to be fitted. So as you can see, I basically used the pattern just like as a template. I went to where my waist was, and then you see I flare out from where the waist is. Now the pattern only goes to a little bit under my bust, but I measured maybe like an inch or so underneath that mark, and then I flared out because that's where the waist will be. Again, I said I didn't want my tunic to be really fitted, so I moved the pattern over an inch from the fold area so that it could give me space. And now I'm just cutting it out. Now, as you can see, when I cut it out, On my pattern, that is the back neckline. That's the neckline for the back. So when you unfold the fabric, that's two pieces of fabric, and I separate them, and then I'm going to fold that piece back together so that I can cut out the front neckline. You cut out the front neckline lower. Usually the back neckline, I make it like an inch down, and then I make the curve, and then for the front, I do maybe like 3 inches down. So like I said, as you can see, the front is lower than the back. Now in this segment, I'm going to be using a pair of sweatpants as a pattern. I always use the sweatpants as a pattern, depending on the fit I want. So if I want my sweatpants to be a little bit baggy, I'll use a pair of sweatpants that fit baggy on me. Or if I want them loose, I'll use them loose. I'll use a loose pair. A tight pair, I'm sorry. So as you can see, I laid the sweatpants down on the fabric. I made a line across because sometimes the fabric isn't always even at the top. So you want to make a line across, a straight line across the top of the fabric, to make it even. So I laid the sweatpants, the top of the sweatpants on the line. And then what I'll be doing is tracing around where the seam is. So I moved the sweatpants up a little bit because I want them to be a little bit, I basically want them to be a little high waist. So I'm going to trace around the waistband, but I am also going to add a waistband. So I needed like a 1/2 inch, for seam allowance so that I can add the waistband on. So I'll be tracing around the pair of sweatpants, and then I'll be cutting out. And this is going to be the front pair. So you'll see how I trace around to the front pair. You'll see how I go up to the seam that's at the crotch and then add a little seam allowance and then continue to trace around. And I'm using one hand and trying to record using my phone in the other hand. So don't mind if you see the fabric kind of like bunching up or whatever. I'm trying to do it with one hand. But anyway, as you can see, I went right to where that seam is at the crotch. That's the front of the pants. And then I just basically like move the pants and like kind of feel where the seam is at and then make a mark under the seam. Like I'll feel where the seam is at and then like lift the pants up, make a mark, feel where the seam is at, lift the pants up, make a mark, etc. until I get all the way down to the bottom. I'm not going to be tracing the cuffs of the pants because I'll be adding a separate cuff onto it, so I won't be tracing the cuffs. And then for the other side, I just trace it straight down because it's not like a separate part like the front and the back for the crotch area. So I finished tracing around, and now I'm going to go down where my finger is. I'm going to go down like 1 inch, and that's where the crotch area is, because our bodies are not shaped like a box. We do have curves. We're not straight like a straight line. We do have curves, so I have to make the front of the pants go down a little bit. The back is always higher to accommodate for our butts. So I go down an inch for the back and then kind of like make a little curve at the top of the pants. But you'll see what I'm talking about when I do it. So now I'm just basically cutting the pants out. And then I'll use those same pants that I just made and use it as a pattern to cut out the back portion of the pants. So I just take it and place it on the fabric so that I can cut out the back portion. Now for the back portion where the crotch is, I go over an inch. Like I said, all of this is to accommodate for our butts. So in the front, we don't have a hump or any of that. You know, it's just pretty flat in the front. So the front crotch area part will be flatter, it will be shorter. But for the back, the crotch area has to go all the way from the middle to the top of our bottom, so you have to accommodate for that. And I'm just marking my patterns. That's the back, so I put a B. I marked both sides of the back pieces, and I'm going to mark both sides of the front pieces. You always want to mark just so that you can know, especially when you're making pants or a shirt and the fabrics, you know, are the same, or, you know, like the prints are the same. You don't want to get confused. And I'm just showing you how the fabrics will go when I sew them. Now I'm just showing you how I fold the fabric together to make a hood. I'm basically just folding it the same way I did the tunic. So for my hoods, I do have a pattern, but I wanted to show you guys how I actually made the pattern for my hood. I just took like an old hoodie, or I mean, it's not old, I still wear it, but I just took a hoodie that I really like, which is actually the best way to make patterns. You just take clothes that fit you really good, the way that you like them to fit, and then you can like trace around them and just add seam allowance, and boom, there's your pattern. But I took the hoodie that I really like and I just traced around the hood, and I kind of just like made adjustments the way I wanted it to be. That hood, it fit, but it was kind of like slim over my head a little bit. So like I like my hoods to be a little bit more spacious, so I just kind of adjusted the way that I wanted it to fit. But yeah, so excuse me, as you can see, I basically just traced around, leaving seam allowance, because if I don't leave seam allowance, it will be too small, basically. So now that I cut the hood out, this is how I fold the fabric when I'm cutting out the sleeves. So I cut the sleeves out with the stretch going downwards, and then I'll place the pattern on the fold of the fabric. So I had one piece of fabric, I folded it in half. I'm going to say salvage to salvage, and then I folded it downwards. so that I can have 4 pieces of fabric, you know, once I cut the sleeve out. Well, it won't be 4 pieces when I cut the sleeve out, because the top of the sleeve is on the folded edge, but in all actuality, it will be 4 ends. But you always want to fold with the stretch going side by side, like I said, because you want it to be comfortable. If the stretch goes the opposite way, if it goes up and down, for one, the sleeve or whatever piece that you're working on, it could get stretched out of shape because the stretch is going down. So you don't want that, it'll pull and tug. So I cut out the sleeves, and now what I'm doing is actually cutting out the cuffs. So you see me measuring my wrist, which sometimes if the fabric wasn't stretched, you would measure your hand, because you want the cuff to be able to go over your hand. It will fit on your wrist, but our wrists are smaller than our hands, so you want to usually measure your hand instead of your wrist. But because the fabric is stretched, I can get away with just measuring my wrist. I usually make my cuffs probably like 4 inches, and then I add half an inch for seam allowance. Yeah, and then I'll just fold them together and sew them, excuse me, and then attach them to the tunic. Well, attach them to the sleeves of the tunic, which I'll show when I put everything together, when I sew everything together. You'll see how I sew everything. Now these are the cuffs for the ankles, and all I did was just measure around my ankle, and then I did the same thing that I did for my wrist. I just measured around my ankle, and you want it to be able to go over your foot. So just take that into consideration when you're measuring. You don't want to measure it like too tight. So take into consideration that it has to go over your foot when you're measuring. And I did that, so I made mine maybe like 5 inches. But when you unfold the fabric, it'll be 10 inches. Just like for my wrist, when you unfold the fabric, it'll be like 8 inches altogether. Now this is the waistband. I'm basically folding the fabric around the waistband so I can see how wide I need to make the waistband. My elastic is probably like 1.5 inches. So I would probably, like if that was doubled, that would be 3 inches. But, excuse me, I'm gonna make my waistband probably like 3.5 inches to 4, so that I can have seam allowance. And I think this is 4 inches. What I did with that was like 4 inches. So I just basically clean up my lines, and then I'm going to cut it out. Excuse me. And I'll be just tracing around it again because it's not long enough. I usually do it in one piece, but I'm kind of working with like scraps here a little bit. So, yeah. Now on this part, I'll be cutting out the front pocket. Excuse me. I'll be cutting out the front pocket, and I actually kind of freehand this, but the same way that I took the hoodie and you trace around the hood, I did the same thing before with the hoodie. Like I just folded it. Basically, I just laid like a piece of fabric on top of the hoodie, and I just traced around. Like you can feel where the pocket is, And when I put the fabric on top of the hoodie, I kind of like traced around it, and the lines that was left over, like once I unfolded the fabric, there was, you know, the marks, and then I just added seam allowance. But I've done this so many times, I kind of know like how to do it. So this is going to be the pocket. Sometimes I add 2 pieces of fabric together and kind of like sew it and then turn it inside out, so I don't have to separately hem everything. But on this one, the fabric is kind of thick and I didn't want to do that. So I will basically just sew around it. Now right here, this is actually optional. Sometimes I like to use the same fabric for the drawstrings instead of using a different fabric. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know what, I mean, it's allergy season. It's kicking my butt already. But y'all do apologize. This is getting on my nerves. I know it gotta be getting on y'all nerves. But yeah, so I'm basically just cutting like a strip of fabric. Well, it's gonna be a couple strips of fabric. And I'm gonna sew them together and make like little tubes, which will basically just turn into the drawstrings for the hood and the drawstring for the waistband. Now, drawstring for a waistband is optional because you do have elastic in it, but sometimes I do like to put a waistband because, I mean, it looks nice, and elastic can kind of get old after time. So if you have a waistband, if you have a drawstring in, you know, it can always help to keep your pants up. Now, right now, I'm folding the fabric to cut out the pockets. Yay, pockets. I don't know what the big deal about pockets, but I'm going to add some to the pants. And I really wasn't going to add any because I don't need them. I always carry pocketbooks. But for the sake of the video, I wanted to show you guys how I make pockets and how I cut them out. And I will eventually like kind of cut that down, like that little hoop down at the bottom, because it was too long. But yeah, this is pretty much the gist of it. This is how the pockets look. I did cut it, trim it down at the bottom some. But yeah, this is how the pockets look. And then I'll like sew them to, I'll place them right size to right size against the tunic fabric. So those are the pockets, and this is the front pocket. So if you enjoyed what you've seen so far, let me know and I'll make a part 2. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment below if you have any questions. Assalamu alaikum and bye.